You're 49 years old, James. Who's gonna hire you now? Brandon's laughter echoed off the conference room walls as I slid my resignation letter across his mahogany desk. After 22 years of dedication, this was how it ended, with mockery from a 34-year-old who'd never worked a day outside his father's company. "You're nothing without this company," he continued, wiping tears from his eyes like my career decision was the funniest joke he'd heard all week. I smiled and said, "You're right, Brandon. Thank you for everything." His words cut deep, but I'd been expecting them. The resignation letter sat there between us like it was personally offending him. The conference room suddenly felt too small, too warm, filled with 18 months of accumulated tension and stolen credit. "I mean it, James," Brandon continued, leaning back in his leather chair with that smug expression I'd grown to despise, the one that appeared whenever he sensed weakness or opportunity. "Who else would hire someone with your limited tech skills? We took a chance on you when Dad restructured the department. Limited tech skills." That phrase hung in the air while my mind flashed back to all the process improvements I'd developed over the years, the manufacturing efficiency gains that saved the company over $2.8 million last quarter alone, the supplier relationships I'd built that kept us running during the supply chain crisis when everyone else was scrambling for parts. All innovations that somehow got credited to Brandon during executive meetings with his father and the board. "The Denver expansion project needs someone who understands modern business approaches," he added, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against my letter like he was conducting an orchestra of condescension. Not that you were ever really in the running for it anyway. But I had been in the running. I'd spent 6 months developing that expansion strategy, working nights and weekends to create a comprehensive plan the board had praised during preliminary reviews. My formal application for project lead had mysteriously disappeared from HR files 3 times. The position eventually went to Brandon's fraternity brother from Wharton, who'd been with the company for exactly 8 weeks and couldn't tell the difference between operational efficiency and operational theater. "I appreciate everything you've taught me," I said, maintaining eye contact despite wanting to walk out of that room and never look back. "This just feels like the right time for a change." "Running away because you can't handle real responsibility," he said, sliding my letter into his desk drawer like he was filing away my entire career. "Go ahead. I'll enjoy watching you fail out there in the real world." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for the past 4 months, I hadn't been eating lunch alone at my desk like everyone assumed. I'd been slipping away from the building and walking 4 blocks through downtown Cleveland to the Sterling Club, meeting with someone who would change everything about my professional future. My name is James Harrison Wild. I'm 49 years old, and until 2 weeks ago, I was an operations director at Westfield Manufacturing. I've been working in operations and logistics for 22 years, ever since I got out of the Navy and decided to put my industrial engineering degree to work in the civilian world. No Ivy League MBA hanging on my wall, no family connections opening doors, just solid work ethic inherited from my father, who worked 35 years at the Ford plant, and a talent for seeing how things actually function versus how they look impressive in PowerPoint presentations. I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in industrial engineering, worked twice as hard as the guys with fancy pedigrees because I had to prove myself every single day. I was the one who showed up at 7:15 every morning, stayed until the problems got solved, and volunteered for the projects nobody else wanted to touch. People called me dependable, thorough, practical. I found solutions where others saw only complications and budget constraints. Brandon became my direct supervisor 18 months ago when his father, CEO Theodore Westfield, restructured the operations department to bring fresh thinking to traditional processes. At 34, Brandon had an MBA from Wharton and a remarkable talent for taking credit for other people's innovations while presenting them as his own strategic insights. His favorite phrase during our weekly team meetings became, "James had some solid initial thoughts here, but I could see what this concept needed to become something actionable and scalable." Translation: I did the work, he took the credit and added buzzwords to make it sound more sophisticated. The day I resigned started exactly like the previous 400 days. I arrived at the office at 7:15, checked production reports from our night shift, updated project timelines, and responded to emails from suppliers about delivery schedules. At 11:45, I told my assistant Carol that I was hitting the gym for a quick workout, then walked those familiar 4 blocks to meet with William Sterling Hoffman. Most people in our industry knew that name, even if they'd never met the man behind it. William had run Hoffman Industries for 35 years before retiring 3 years ago, transforming struggling manufacturing operations across the Midwest into industry leaders. When he stepped down from active management, rumors flew about his reasons: health problems, family crises, secret government consulting contracts, or just exhaustion from decades of 70-hour weeks. The truth, as I would learn, was simpler and more interesting than any of the speculations swirling through industry publications and conference networking sessions. Our first meeting had been pure coincidence, the kind of random encounter that changes everything without you realizing it at the time. I was volunteering at the annual United Way golf tournament, working the registration table because my wife Linda and I believed in giving back to our community. William was playing in the tournament with a foursome of other retired executives, and we ended up talking during a 30-minute rain delay that sent everyone scrambling for the clubhouse. He asked questions about modern manufacturing challenges that nobody had ever posed to me before. Not the usual small talk about productivity metrics or cost reduction targets, but deeper questions about systemic inefficiencies and how American manufacturing could compete in a global economy where labor costs would never be our advantage. "Most people focus on cutting costs," he said, sipping his coffee while rain drummed against the clubhouse windows. "But the real opportunity is in eliminating waste that nobody's even identified yet." That conversation led to lunch the following week at the Sterling Club, an old money establishment downtown where the waiters knew everyone's name and the business deals were as carefully orchestrated as the wine selection. Then another lunch. For 4 months we met every Tuesday and Thursday at the same corner table, discussing industry trends, operational innovations, and what the next decade might look like for American manufacturing. "You see inefficiencies others miss," he told me during our 5th meeting, studying me with those sharp blue eyes that had intimidated competitors for 3 decades. "Most managers manage people, you manage systems." I never complained about Brandon or the credit stealing during these meetings. Somehow it felt unprofessional, like airing dirty laundry to someone whose respect I was trying to earn. Instead, I focused on solutions, improvements, and possibilities. William tested me with increasingly complex scenarios that required practical thinking rather than theoretical knowledge. He'd describe a struggling manufacturing plant, real situations from his consulting work he later revealed, and ask how I'd approach the problems. Sometimes I nailed it, identifying bottlenecks and solutions that aligned with his experience. Sometimes I fell completely flat, missing obvious issues or proposing changes that would create more problems than they solved. But I always learned something from his feedback. "The difference between good operations managers and great ones," he said during our 8th lunch, cutting into his salmon with surgical precision, "is that good ones solve today's problems. Great ones prevent tomorrow's." What I didn't realize during those early lunches was that William hadn't actually retired from business. He'd stepped back from day-to-day management to identify the right partner for his next venture. For over a year, he'd been quietly interviewing potential candidates, but not through traditional channels or executive search firms. "I've been watching how different people approach problems," he explained during our 14th meeting, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made billion-dollar decisions and lived with the consequences. "Most people stick to what they learned in MBA programs. You adapt to what actually works in real environments." The Sterling Club had become our regular spot, a place where conversations happened in measured tones and handshake agreements still meant something. William always arrived first, always ordered the same lunch, and always had a new challenge for me to consider. I started looking forward to these meetings more than any other part of my week, including weekends. 2 weeks before I submitted my resignation letter, William made the offer that would change everything about my professional future. "I'm starting a consulting firm," he said, setting down his coffee cup with the deliberate movement of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "Operational excellence for mid-market manufacturers. Companies with $50 million to $500 million in revenue who are getting squeezed by larger competitors and offshore production." The Sterling Club's dining room hummed with quiet conversations around us, the sound of serious business being conducted over properly prepared meals. I waited for him to continue, sensing that this moment was more significant than our previous discussions. "The board has approved initial funding of $2.8 million, he continued, "and I want you as senior partner, not an employee, not a consultant, but a partner with equity stake and decision-making authority." The position came with a base salary of $165,000, 3% equity in the firm, and the chance to help companies across the Midwest improve their operations in ways that would actually matter. It also required complete confidentiality until we made the public announcement, which wouldn't happen for at least 6 weeks. Why me? I asked, genuine curiosity overriding the excitement that was building in my chest. You could have your pick of executives with better credentials and more prestigious backgrounds. William's answer would stay with me for the rest of my career. Because when systems fail, you don't just complain about bureaucracy or blame other departments. You figure out how to make them work better. That's rarer than people think. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a leather portfolio containing partnership agreements, equity documentation, and a timeline for launching Hoffman Strategic Partners. Everything was already prepared, down to the business cards and letterhead design. I've been planning this for 18 months, he admitted. The research phase included speaking with board members at various companies about untapped potential in their organizations. Your name came up repeatedly. My mind reeled with possibilities and questions. What about Westfield? My current projects? Handle your transition professionally, he advised. Give proper notice, train your replacement, and finish your current commitments. We'll announce the partnership 3 weeks after your departure, which gives you time to settle any non-compete concerns and gives me time to finalize our client development strategy. That night, I sat in my home office staring at the partnership documents while Linda read over my shoulder. 22 years of steady employment versus the chance to build something meaningful with a legend in our industry. What does your gut tell you? She asked. That I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't try. The day after my resignation, Brandon sent me an email that I saved in a special folder marked Evidence of Character. The subject line read, "Reality check," and the message was brief. When reality hits out there, don't come crawling back for your old job. The industry is smaller than you think. I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the next 2 weeks doing what my father had taught me, finishing the job properly. I trained my replacement, Sarah Mitchell, a sharp 32-year-old engineer who deserved better mentorship than she was going to get under Brandon's supervision. I documented every ongoing project, organized files that had been accumulating for months, and created transition guides that would help the department function smoothly after my departure. My colleagues whispered about my foolishness in hushed conversations by the coffee machine, leaving a secure job at 49 in this economy, with no guarantee of finding anything equivalent. The whispers followed me through the hallways like a Greek chorus of doubt and concern. I let them think what they wanted. No point in defending a decision I couldn't fully explain without violating the confidentiality agreement William and I had signed. Better to be seen as reckless than to compromise our launch strategy by revealing details prematurely. I cleaned out my desk on a Friday afternoon while most people had already left for weekend plans. 22 years of accumulated desk accessories, family photos, and industry awards fit into one medium-sized cardboard box. As I carried it through the empty hallways, past the conference rooms where I'd presented so many ideas that became Brandon's innovations, I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my professional life. Was I abandoning 22 years of built-up equity and institutional knowledge for something that might collapse before we signed our first client? The doubt lasted about 45 seconds before I reminded myself what William had said during our final Sterling Club lunch. The biggest risk isn't failure. It's spending the rest of your career wondering what might have been. Monday morning, I walked into the temporary offices William had leased in a renovated warehouse downtown, where a team of 6 experienced consultants was waiting for direction. By noon, we'd mapped out our service delivery model. By 5 p.m., we had our first 4 client meetings scheduled and a marketing strategy that focused on results rather than credentials. The energy in that converted warehouse space was unlike anything I'd experienced in corporate America. Everyone was there because they wanted to build something meaningful, not because they were collecting paychecks while waiting for retirement. For the first time in years, my ideas weren't just heard. They were challenged, refined, and implemented within days, rather than disappearing into committee reviews and bureaucratic delays. You need to present our methodology to the automotive group yourself, William told me when we prepared for our first major pitch to a consortium of auto parts manufacturers. They need to see the expertise behind the concepts, not just hear about it secondhand. Wouldn't it carry more weight coming from you? I asked, thinking about all the times my presentations had been delivered by Brandon while I watched from the back of the room. William's expression hardened in a way that reminded me why he'd been such a formidable CEO. Is that what you learned at Westfield? To hide your expertise behind someone else's reputation? That question hit harder than he could know. I'd gotten so accustomed to having my contributions minimized and repackaged that I'd started expecting it as normal business practice. Something fundamental shifted inside me that afternoon. I spent the weekend rewriting our presentation, infusing it with my voice, my experience, and my confidence in what we could accomplish together. When I finished presenting to the automotive manufacturing group the following Tuesday, there was silence before the group leader leaned forward with obvious interest. "This systematic approach is unlike anything we've evaluated before," he said, flipping through our proposal materials. "The implementation risk is significant, but so is the potential for transformational improvement." My heart sank, interpreting his words as polite rejection. Then he continued, "You have our unanimous support for a 6-month pilot program. When can you start?" That evening, William and I celebrated with our team at Morton's Steakhouse downtown. As conversations flowed around us about client strategies and market opportunities, he said quietly, "Your former boss has called me twice trying to schedule a meeting." My stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. What does he want? What people like him always want: to be associated with success they didn't help create. He studied my reaction carefully. "He doesn't know you're the architect behind our systematic approach, does he?" I shook my head. While the public announcement had named me senior partner, the specific details of our operational excellence methodology remained confidential. Only our team and clients understood that the systematic approach we were implementing had evolved from concepts I'd been developing for years. Ideas that Brandon had repeatedly dismissed as overly complex for practical application and academic rather than business-focused. "He'll figure it out eventually," William warned. "Be prepared for some interesting conversations." 6 weeks into our partnership, we announced our first major client success, a $1.4 million contract to overhaul operations at a struggling automotive supplier. The selection process had been competitive and blind, with consulting firms submitting proposals without knowing who would evaluate them. When Westfield Manufacturing's proposal came in ranked 8th out of 9 submissions, I wasn't surprised. Their approach showed fundamental misunderstanding of the operational principles that Brandon had publicly claimed his team had mastered. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. "James," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of manufactured warmth that I'd learned to distrust. "It's been too long. I've been trying to connect with your new partner." "I've been busy launching the business," I replied, keeping my voice neutral while my pulse accelerated. "What can I do for you? I wanted to congratulate you personally. Working with William Hoffman, that's quite a step up for someone at your experience level." There it was again, the automatic condescension, the reflexive need to diminish even while pretending to praise. "Thank you," I said, offering nothing more. Let him fill the silence with his own assumptions and agenda. "I notice our proposal wasn't selected for that automotive contract," he continued, his voice carrying that edge of entitlement that had always grated on me. "There must have been some kind of oversight. Our submission met all the technical requirements." I took a deep breath, remembering William's advice about maintaining professional composure even when dealing with people who operated without professional integrity. The selection process was completely blind, Brandon. Company names were removed during evaluation. Every proposal was judged purely on technical merit and practical implementation strategy. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Their proposal hadn't been good enough. Not because I'd manipulated the process, but because their approach demonstrated fundamental gaps in understanding operational excellence. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. If Brandon had actually implemented my suggestions over the past 18 months instead of dismissing them as outdated thinking, Westfield might have had a competitive submission. "Perhaps we could meet for lunch," he suggested finally, his tone shifting to something that might have been desperation disguised as networking. "I could offer some insights on your new venture, share some perspective from the industry." "That won't be necessary," I said, "but I appreciate the offer." 2 weeks later, Manufacturing Weekly published an interview with Brandon that made my blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. In it, he claimed that the operational excellence methodology at the heart of our consulting practice had originated in his department at Westfield Manufacturing. The fundamental systematic approach was developed under my leadership, he stated with breathtaking audacity. While certain elements have been modified for different client applications, the core framework emerged from our team's process improvement initiatives last year. My phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues. Some expressed outrage on my behalf. Others asked if Brandon's claims had any basis in reality. William forwarded me the article with a single question mark waiting for my explanation. Rather than engage in a public dispute that would force us to reveal proprietary details before we were ready, I suggested something more elegant. "Let's invite Brandon to our quarterly client showcase," I told William. "Give him a platform to demonstrate his expertise in operational excellence to industry peers." William's eyebrows went up. "That's either brilliant or potentially cruel." "It's transparent," I replied. "If he truly believes his team developed these concepts, he should be able to articulate them to a room full of manufacturing professionals." The invitation went out with language that Brandon couldn't refuse without losing face. An opportunity to share insights as a thought leader among regional manufacturing innovators. He accepted within 2 hours. The quarterly showcase was held at the Cleveland Convention Center with representatives from 45 manufacturing companies. Brandon arrived early, dressed impeccably as always, working the room with practiced charm. When he saw me greeting attendees and introducing speakers, he pulled me aside with obvious confusion. "I wasn't expecting to see you in a presenting role," he said. "I thought you'd be handling logistics coordination." I smiled. "Something like that." Before I could elaborate, William called the session to order. He welcomed everyone, outlined the agenda for discussing operational excellence in American manufacturing, then introduced me not just as senior partner, but as the lead architect of our entire systematic methodology. "James will walk us through the theoretical foundations and practical applications before we hear from several companies about their implementation experiences," William announced to the room. Brandon's expression froze somewhere between shock and dawning comprehension as I took center stage and began my presentation. I outlined the systematic approach to identifying operational inefficiencies, the cost-benefit analysis methodology for prioritizing improvements, and the change management principles that had produced measurable results for our clients. When I finished, the room erupted in sustained applause. Everyone except Brandon, who stared at his hands with the expression of someone realizing he'd walked into a trap of his own making. Next, representatives from 4 client companies shared their experiences implementing our framework. Efficiency gains of 18 to 32%, cost reductions exceeding initial projections, improved employee satisfaction scores and reduced turnover rates, testimonial after testimonial of real results from real implementation. Finally, it was Brandon's turn. William introduced him as representing a company interested in operational excellence and invited him to share Westfield's approach with the group. He stood, slowly, straightening his tie with hands that weren't entirely steady. "Thank you for the opportunity," he began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "As I've mentioned in recent interviews, many elements of this systematic approach have parallels to work our team has been developing." A murmur ran through the room as experienced manufacturing executives recognized the obvious hedging and backpedaling. "However," Brandon continued, sensing the skepticism and attempting damage control, "today I'm more interested in learning how we might adapt these proven methodologies to our specific operational challenges." That's when I did something I hadn't planned. I raised my hand and spoke with the calm authority that comes from actual expertise rather than borrowed credibility. "Actually, Brandon, I'd be very interested to hear more specifics about the operational framework your team developed. Could you walk us through the key elements and how they differ from what we've presented today?" The room went completely silent. 45 manufacturing professionals shifted their attention between us as Brandon's confident facade crumbled in real time. He cleared his throat, adjusted his watch, glanced around the room seeking an ally who didn't exist. What followed was 3 minutes of professional fumbling that I almost felt sorry witnessing. Brandon stumbled through vague statements about systematic process optimization and efficiency enhancement protocols while carefully avoiding any specific claims he might have to defend. With each evasion, his credibility visibly evaporated. The audience, experienced executives who knew substance from sales pitch, grew visibly uncomfortable watching someone so obviously unprepared attempt to discuss concepts he clearly didn't understand. Finally, William stepped in with the moment that would define Brandon's reputation in our industry for years to come. "While Brandon collects his thoughts," he said, clicking his remote to display a new slide, "I'd like to share some background with the group." The screen showed a timeline documenting the development of our operational excellence methodology, including dated records of concept sessions, test implementations, and client results. Every entry traced back to documented work I'd done over the previous 3 years. "This timeline shows the actual evolution of our approach," William continued, including research I conducted while identifying potential partners. Part of that process involved speaking with board members at various companies about untapped potential within their organizations. My heart stopped when I realized what was coming next. Board member Patricia Wu at Westfield Manufacturing was particularly helpful. She provided examples of innovative proposals that had been repeatedly submitted but never implemented, proposals that demonstrated exactly the kind of systematic thinking we were seeking. On screen appeared copies of my original operational improvement proposals to Brandon, complete with his dismissive comments in the margins. Comments like overly academic for practical application and demonstrates misunderstanding of budget realities. The same concepts that now formed the backbone of our successful consulting practice, generating measurable results for clients across the region. Brandon's face went from red to white. Those documents were internal company materials. Indeed they were, William agreed, which makes your recent public claims particularly problematic, both ethically and from a legal standpoint. The showcase concluded shortly after, with Brandon making a hasty exit that fooled no one. As attendees gathered their materials and exchanged business cards, William approached me with something that might have been an apology. "I should have warned you I was going to present that timeline," he said. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Because I wanted to see how you'd handle the moment when he tried to claim credit again. You chose transparency over personal revenge. That confirmed everything I believed about your character." 6 months after my resignation, Hoffman Strategic Partners was profitable, growing, and making a real difference in American manufacturing. Companies throughout the region were implementing our operational excellence framework, creating measurable improvements in efficiency, cost control, and employee satisfaction. Yesterday, I received a LinkedIn message that now sits framed on my desk. It came from a 53-year-old operations manager in Detroit who'd read about our company in Industry Week. Finally, he wrote, "Someone proving that experience beats credentials every time." A year later, I'm sitting in my corner office overlooking downtown Cleveland, watching our 15th client sign their contract extension. The constant background noise of age discrimination and workplace diminishment that used to fill my head has been replaced by something I'd forgotten could exist: genuine professional respect earned through results, rather than politics. Our team now includes 12 seasoned professionals, each of whom brings decades of real-world experience to solving complex operational challenges. Gray hair and reading glasses aren't signs of decline in our office. They're badges of expertise that clients value and competitors try to recruit. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your opponent. It's building something so much better that their attempts at sabotage become irrelevant. Sometimes winning isn't about getting even. It's about proving that everything they said you couldn't do was not just wrong, but laughably small compared to what you actually could accomplish. Experience isn't outdated, it's irreplaceable. And at 49, I'm just getting started.